Hi, Say. This is James Arndt from the Web Programming JavaScript Discord Professor Seuss class here, and I saw your question on Discord and what you're able to accomplish for assignment 1, and that you did get the column hiding working in the different screen resolutions, which is really good because that was a big part of the assignment. But you're also saying that in the normal scale, you're not really following. You think that it might be the layout of the header, content, sidebar, footer, all of that stuff. And you've been looking, and that you might appreciate a good online resource or website. And I recommended W3 Schools, right? Which is this website, right? And I go into the Learn Bootstrap area. And since we've been working with grids, I usually go over to BS Grid Basic, and I just take a look at this to see how a web page is laid out with Bootstrap. So you were saying some of your issues might have been layout, arranging items. And this kind of shows you how it works, right? It's always a 12 column. There are 12 columns, and you can see them with these small spans at the top here. And then you can, of course, have some divs that go across multiple columns. Like this one goes across 4 columns and 4 and 4, and it makes up 12. So we can kind of use this system to lay out the website. And then you would recognize these because in your code, these are what you would use to check against the visibility. If a certain div or HTML element was visible on a medium-sized screen versus if it was visible on a phone screen. And so, yeah, Professor Sue in the lecture was doing, like on the phone screen, he was hiding some stuff, like maybe the logo and stuff like that. One of the great things about W3 Schools is the try it yourself, this real-time editor that you can go in here, and I could double-click this Inline CSS Style, and we can edit the code and then click Run and see our changes, right? Okay. So this is Inline CSS. I'm not sure if you've taken any CSS courses or web design or anything or know what cascading style sheets are, but basically they're how we would format the layout, right? We can change the colors, we can change the typography, we can change the size of some of this stuff. And this is inline, which means it's in the line of this code. And if I were to delete it out of here and run, then the style would disappear for that div. But we can use a style in this line here, this div, but we'd need to do it a different way, right? Or we don't need to. Professor Sue was pretty clear in his lectures that he didn't care how you did the CSS. But if we looked at his examples and you were going off of his examples and his lectures, he's putting the CSS up here in the head of your HTML document here, up in the head tag. And he had classes, dot header, dot footer, dot sidebar, and he had those inside of the style, right? And they were class selectors. So what they did was he could determine all these nice styles for colors up here in the height of the divs. And then down here, he could reference that style inside of the div by just calling the class there. And so what we'll do is I'll just write a little bit of code here and kind of explain how that works. But yeah, this W3C, I don't know why I keep saying that. The W3 Schools website's really great. They also have a good CSS section. If you want to brush up on that, you can go in the editor and take a good look at just changing some values and see how that affects things, right? Okay, so that's a really good resource. He listed up in the class resources in the intro or something like that, he listed several good sites, and this is a really good one. So in Module 2 for the assignment 1 here at the very top, he put this boilerplate code, which I'm just going to select, right click, and copy. And this was just because there are a lot of links to scripts and libraries and stuff for the Bootstrap and for the jQuery and for JavaScript, I do believe, maybe in here somewhere. And so we would just copy this boilerplate, and that's why he gave it to us, right? It's something to start with, so you don't have to sit here and waste your time typing this out all by hand. So let's bring up my code editor. And so I would Control V or right click and paste and just put that basic code into my IDE or my my web scripting environment. For myself, it's Brackets. I really like it. It's made by Adobe. If you Google Brackets code editor in Google, you'll get a result for it. It's made by Adobe, so it looks like Photoshop, has a familiar interface like Photoshop. It has a lot of really nice features like the code indentation lines. Also, if you select like an opening tag for something, it'll highlight where the closing tag is. It'll add closing tags for you automatically. I really like the live preview. So if I click live preview and I go over here and give it a second, kind of roll this over, we'll see that I have a Chrome window opened up here now, and I can change this in real time. And we literally, without even hitting the refresh button on the website, we see this stuff happening on the website. So it's one of the reasons I really like Brackets. And I'm sure there are, I think the Atom, ATOM editor is very similar. So for his example, we're using Bootstrap. So we want to create a container and some rows and some columns for that. You probably might already understand all of this and know all of it, but I made a little Photoshop document here to kind of illustrate how it works. And so there are 12 columns, right? Always 12. We can fill so many of them, right? We could fill this, in this case it fills 6. We could fill like 8 of them, right? We could fill 1 with content. In our case, for what he's doing for assignment 1, this would fill 2 columns. We're using divs. So this is what the code would look like here. Div class equals column for the medium screen resolution, and it would be 12. It's a 12 column wide div. So that would look like this. That's exactly the div it would make, right? Assuming that this is nested inside of a row, right? Because we first create the row, and then we would create the column, or however many columns we want to fill it with. So what he was doing is say for the logo at the top, he was filling maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and he had created a row. This first row, this pink block is in row 1, and it's filling 5 columns. And that would have been the like the logo or whatever. And then he had content that came down, and it might have looked, let me change the color. It might have looked something like that, the content. So now we can see that yes, content is still also filling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, and that it's in a second row. We've started the green div because our code's going to look like that, right? Except in this instance, the code matching our visuals, the code would look like that. We'd say 5 columns for the medium width screen, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so that would be our content. That would be our logo. And then to get the height to be separate, you don't need to create more rows. You just need to go in and style with the CSS and set a minimum height for this. So minimum height for the pink logo up here in the CSS style might be min height 50 pixels, 100 pixels. Then the CSS style for your green middle content area here might be min height 300 pixels. So we're just creating the height. So this is still 1 row, 2 rows. The pink is 1 row, the green is 1 row. So it's 2 rows. And then the amount of columns it spans. And the neat thing is you can maintain the 2 rows, but you could expand across as many columns as you like differently, right? Because they're independent. We're utilizing this grid. This grid allows us to kind of fill all of these different spaces in an arbitrary way, but also it has to be a way that it fits inside the definition of these grid units, right? Has to stay in this. We can't have something that exceeds the 12, but we could have something less. So I'm going to go back over to the code real quick. And the way we'd want to start this is we'd want to create a div, right? And I'm going to try to go through this really quick. And in this div, we want to make our row, right? So there we go. We have a row now. And so like we looked in our Photoshop document, it would go across the screen like this, right? But now we need to fill the row with a column. Put a column in there. So what we could do is another div, and we will use the Bootstrap built-in MD12, and then we'll close that out. And then, so now we have a column, that fills 12. But we have an object, a div in here that spans across the 12 columns. That's what I need to say, right? We can't see it. It has no color yet. So in order to see it, what we would want to do is most likely create a CSS style, and that's what he has in his Professor Sue has in his demonstration videos on YouTube for the class. And we would do that up inside of the head tag for our HTML, and we would write style type equals text dash CSS, and then we'll close it out, and brackets automatically creates that closing style for me. And so now we have a CSS style, but it's not doing anything because we haven't created any formatting for any specific HTML elements or anything. So let's go in here and make a color, right? Something nice. We could make a color. Let's say dot header. This would be the very top of the page. And we would say background color, and we'll say blue. Okay. Fix my indentation. We don't see anything because this style is created now, but we're not using it, right? We're saying, well, there should be an HTML element in our code called with a class of header somewhere, but we don't have that anywhere. So what we want to do, I'm going to do some indenting so we can see what's going on here a little better. So we've created our row. Brackets is showing me where it opens and where it closes. And then we've created this column that spans across all 12 columns, right? All 12 in the grid. So inside of that, let's put another div that's going to be the content inside of this div here that spans the 12 columns. So let's create like a content div in there. So what we can do is just do the standard div class equals, and we're going to use our class selector up here. We're going to say, let's format it with this. So we're going to say div class header. We're going to close it out, and then we'll write some text as a label to fit inside of that div. So here we have it, right? We've got our row, we've got our column, and then we've got our div that spans across 12 column grid units, and then we've got our content that would be inside of that. For right now, it's just the word header. We can't read it very well, but it's there. And you'll notice as I move across, it's filling the entire website. One of the things I missed was in front of creating this, oh, my caps key is on. I didn't create the container for it, so that's not good. We need to create a container to hold basically all of the elements on the page. And I did not create that. And so we need to take the closing div it auto-created and put it down here. And then we'll do some indenting. So now you can see everything is inside of the container, right? Bootstrap also has a type of container called container fluid, which just spans across very much like it did without having the container on there. And it spans across the entire width, edge to edge on the screen. If you use just the Bootstrap built-in container, that is a static width container, and it doesn't span the entire width of the screen, really. It just scales down. When it gets to mobile resolution, it looks like it's hugging the edges of the screen, but honestly on your mobile phones and tablets and stuff, you're not changing the scale of the screen resolution, so it's always fixed. So there we go. That is 12 grid units across that div, and it's blue. So let's say we want to change the text color so that we can see it better. We'd say color white, so everything inside of that div would turn white. Okay. Let's say we want it to be a little taller. So we could do min height and say 100 pixels. And we have a header that's a bit taller, right? Pretty neat. Still consuming that 12 grid units across. We could change this and experiment and make it 6. So now it's half of the width of the container. Okay. Which is neat because this is where we can, let's select our column and everything in it. Okay, Control C. And then let's paste and fix my indenting, which is awful. It's getting way out of hand here. Because this is still everything. Okay, there's the container. Yes. See how important indentation is? So that's the container. It shows me where it opens and closes. That's the row. Shows me where it opens and closes. That shows me where this column opens and closes, and then, or where this div does and where this div does. So let's call this sidebar, right? So now they're both 6 units across, and so that totals within this row, this single row across, that allows me to total up to 12, so I don't exceed what I'm allowed to have in Bootstrap. So now we have a header and a sidebar, right? And we're controlling the layout on them. We're controlling their color, their scale. We're controlling where they go. So say we want to color the sidebar something differently. Okay? So what we're doing is we're using this class selector we've created called .header, and we're using it for both pieces of content. So they're both going to share the formatting, right? So if I make it red, they both turn red, but we don't want that. So the best thing to do would be to copy, right click, copy, go down, paste. And so calling the header class selector header was smart because that is our header and we have a header label. This one's called sidebar. So let's just stay with the naming convention. Turn off our caps locks. Call it sidebar. Save. We don't see any change, but it's because they're identical. So if I change it to orange, nothing changes. Why is that? Well, I have a CSS style and I have the selector for sidebar, but it's not being used. So let's copy it. We can see that our class selector is still using header for both. So it's only going to be formatted blue with white text until we paste that in. Now we can have a different colored sidebar, different colored header. This could also mean a different background image, different text, stuff like that. Okay. So another neat trick I'm going to show you is Bootstrap by default for these. 1 second here. So for these columns or whatever in Bootstrap, there's this annoying amount of gap padding and spacing and everything, and you can format that. But we'd want to modify that layout and format that with CSS. So let's create a class selector called spacer. That's fine. It's going to create, we really want to name these what they're going to do. And that's mainly why Professor Sue is naming them header, footer, sidebar, stuff like that, because it represents actually exactly what they're going to do. So let's adjust the padding between these items, okay? So we just say padding, and we want to adjust it around all the sides, not padding left, not padding right or up or down. We want it to be the padding around the entire div object. So there we go. We have our class selector for padding. We just called it spacer, but we could call it Could literally call it padding. Kind of like that. And what we want to do is we'll want to format these columns with this padding. So what we can do is go in here, and where we're setting this column, paste in our padding selector. And there we go. Now we have control. See this? See if I can minimize this so you can see a little better. Now we have global control over the amount of space between those items. I like to make it kind of small. When you looked at Professor Sue's demonstration, you could see that the adjustment between the padding and margin between his items were narrow like that as well. So there's a header and sidebar. Last part of the equation is when you were talking about having difficulties with the layout, is say we want to lay out another row. We want more items. We want content down here, links or something over here. So we need another row. So what we do is just apply a little simple logic to it and say, look, well, we just need to copy all of this row, basically, and the columns information inside of it. And so what we'll do, and there we go, we have a second row. Okay. Now in the second row, we can get creative, and we know in this row that we're getting our 12 grid units across by doing 6 and 6, but say we want to do 10, 2 and 10. So this little item over here would be, let's say it's links. Beautiful. Look at that, links. And let's say this is content. Beautiful. Look at this. Let's ship it. This is deliverable. This is the next Instagram right here. And I'm kidding. But in all seriousness, there you go. I mean, this is what we've done. We've created this first row here. In fact, when I select it in brackets, it highlights all the elements inside of it. It's really nice. That's our first row. This is our second row. And then we're putting these divs. Just think of the divs as, once you color them, you can visualize them as blocks. Just visualize them as building blocks. And you're going to take these divs or these building blocks and you're going to fill these grid units. You're going to fill all of these grid box units with the div, the box. It's not a box. That's actually a different class or attribute in there. And so, you know, we want to create specific formatting for the links. So instead of rewriting code, let's copy paste. And let's call this selector something like links. Let's do a lot of copy and pasting. Let's change its background color to something obnoxious. I really like purple and I like pink. I'm not ashamed to say it. And then in the links, instead of tying it to the header formatting, which is why it's blue, let's tie it to the color purple. And so we have an issue that's happened here. So links, it lost that header formatting that was saying, hey, let's keep this div's minimum height 200. So let's go up here, copy it, and this way the height will match, right? So if we change that and we want our content to change, and we're not actually even using there we are, we're using sidebar. We need to make sure that we look at our class selector for it and that we match that 300 pixels tall. All right. Now what we'll need to do is, you know, this is another thing that's not absolutely mandatory, but we'd have to clear some floats on these after this row is drawn, clear the float on that. But this should really get you going. This should show you the connection between these divs, you know, creating the columns for these. Here we can go 3 and 9. Give that a little more spacing. That's how you lay it out, right? That's how you would lay it out. You say, I need more room for my links. Give more of the column grid to your links. Let's go 4. Let's go 8. We got more now. We want links and content to be taller. Let's go taller. Yeah, we need a custom. Problem is, sidebar, when we saw this happen. So when we go in here and we're saying, well, we need to match the sidebar. So yes, it increases the height of the content box here to match, but it also, because sidebar up here is sharing this same styling, it also shoots down, and that's not what we want. So what that shows us is instead of using the sidebar class selector for the sidebar and for the content, we really need to create a new custom. Let me make sure I've copy. I'm hitting Control C and Control V when I do this. Let's make sure we create a custom CSS styling. And we can share the same color sidebar. That's fine. So there we go. We have one for content. Let's Control C, Control V, put it in. Now we can adjust and format just this content div without affecting the sidebar div. Okay? And we do this by putting these class, these class definitions. This is an attribute of this div. So we're giving the div an attribute, and the attribute is this class up here, this class selector. It's really awesome. It's really powerful. I hope I'm not going on too long, and I hope this is informative, but this CSS style right here that is embedded into this HTML is what's formatting the size. It's formatting the gaps between the objects. It's formatting the color of the text, basically everything. And it's doing a bit of the layout. Not really. It's, pseudo layout, right? Because we're adjusting the height of these things, so we're assuming, well, that's tweaking the layout. With the Bootstrap determining how it lays out on the grid, it's not really. This is what is controlling the this is what's controlling the layout. How far things extend, where they're placed on the screen. It's all of these columns and rows. So hopefully this makes sense. A row, and then the columns inside of it. Now, right now we just have 2 divs that take up 6 units of the grid each across there, but we could have 1, 2, we could have 4, 5, we could have 12 columns, 12 visible div boxes. But just to demonstrate how this works, hopefully that helps. And you've got this part working. You said you got this working, so when I come in here, I want maybe the sidebar to disappear, right? That's it. That's how it works. And I would highly recommend Brackets. It's free, and it makes the code editing really nice. And you don't have to use the theme that I'm using. I just really enjoy it. I like to code on the black, the dark. It's easier on my eyes, and I have poor vision. So hopefully that gets you going for assignment 1. Really, honestly, everything that I've done here and shown is enough, other than the visibility aspect, is enough to really get you going, a good basis to get going on laying out what he's required for the first assignment. And it's really important that these first assignments are really solid in your mind and that you understand exactly what's going on here, because, as we move along, all he's doing is just stacking more functionality on top of this base. So the foundation in your base understanding has to be really strong. Hopefully that's helped. And I'll be willing to help on anything else. All right. Thank you.